Greetings fellow mammals. As announced in the last video, today it's finally time to explain what the suppressors actually do and how they differ from each other. So let's not waste any more time and take a look at this. Technically the game has 5 different suppressors, but you will see why I chose to only start off with these 4 in a minute. On the left we have the 2, as I call them, small suppressors, and on the right we have the 2 big ones. Why do I differentiate them like that? Well, to point out the difference in map stealth and also just because of the size of their models. Now, what is map stealth? Well, you see, every time you fire your weapon, you appear as a red dot on a map for the entire enemy team. Anyone who is currently observing the spawn screen, for example, and deciding where to deploy, will see exactly where you are. And anyone who is close enough to you on the battlefield will also see you on their minimap on the bottom left, which you can, by the way, adjust in range. There are a few ways to avoid this whole thing, but today we want to focus on the suppressors, obviously. So I will just showcase this mechanic in the game itself to make it really simple. And shout out to Richard here who helped with these clips. In this first one, Richard will fire a completely unsuppressed weapon, and I want you to focus on the minimap on the bottom left. As you can clearly see, it precisely gives away his location. He will now use one of the small suppressors, so either wrapped or 6KU, doesn't matter. He is now at a distance of 31 meters, and suddenly he does not show up on the map anymore. But if he moves closer to 29 meters, there he is again. Now, if he switches to one of the big suppressors, type 4 or PB heavy, he can move even closer, up to 16 meters. And we, again, cannot see him on the map. But at 14 meters, we can see him again. I hope that showcase made it easy to understand how this works. Basically, there is a 30 meter and a 15 meter radius, depending on which suppressor you use. But there is also one more thing we can do to reduce those ranges even further. Because as you can tell, we haven't achieved full stealth yet. If you combine any suppressor with subsonic ammo, those ranges will be reduced by another 15 meters. So if you would use a small suppressor, that would cut the radius down from 30 to 15 meters. So with that combo you basically reach the big suppressor's default state. But for full stealth you have to use a big suppressor with subsonic ammo. That will reduce the 15 meters default to 0. And as Richard will kindly demonstrate, it is literally 0 meters. He could pierce my earlobe with that gun right there and the map still wouldn't tell me anymore. So, now that we have a clear understanding of the basic functions of suppressors in this game, we can check off that first row on the infograph and talk about the other stuff on there. All suppressors have 2 things in common, namely that they reduce or almost completely eliminate any muzzle flash that could give away your position, and they also reduce your weapon's sound. It's still possible for enemies to locate you just from the sound, but it should be much harder and a lot less likely. The parts where the suppressors do differ, apart from the stealth aspect, are the damage multipliers and the velocity adjustments. Let's get the less relevant one out of the way first. Bullet velocity is obviously something you want to have as much of as possible, because that makes hitting shots at range easier, but it is certainly not something you should worry about primarily. So from my point of view, unless we are talking about sniping or long-range DMRs, the velocity reductions here are all pretty much irrelevant. What is much more relevant is the damage reduction. Now, why does that matter exactly? Well, every player has 100 points of health. If we take my favorite weapon, the S4, as an example now, that gun deals 26 points of damage per shot. So we need 4 shots to kill a target. Now let's say we attach the 6KU suppressor on there. This would mean we receive a damage nerf of 8%. So now we don't deal 26, but 23.92 points of damage. And suddenly 4 shots aren't enough to surpass that magical number of 100 anymore. So logically, now we need to hit 5 shots instead of 4 to kill the exact same enemy. That is not something you want to do to your weapon. For obvious reasons, any reasonable player would want to reduce the time to kill, not increase it. And unfortunately, those 8% are often enough to reduce the bullet to kill threshold of a lot of weapons in this game. Hence why I rarely, if ever, recommend using it. You are basically handicapping yourself if you pick the 6KU. And that is also the reason why I usually recommend the wrap suppressor. As you can see, that one has no damage reduction at all. Yes, you do still suffer from a 15% lower bullet velocity, but at least your damage stays the exact same while you can profit from the stealth. And that brings me to the heavy couple on the right. Obviously, if 8% is already enough to cripple most guns in the lineup, those 10% on the PB heavy can can only be worse. And you're damn right they are. There are maybe 2 guns I can think of where it's not a considerable handicap. The 5% nerf from the Type 4 suppressor on the other hand is really walking on the edge. On some weapons it barely works, and on others it's unfortunately that tiny little bit too much. So with that one you really gotta double check with the actual damage values on my spreadsheet. Now, why did I initially say there are actually 5 suppressors? Well, you see, technically there are even more, but realistically it's 5. Here's why. The sidearms received their own Frankenstein one. There are actually multiple models and names, but they all share the exact same stats, so I will just group them up as the Sidearm Suppressor. This one is basically a mix made out of the 6KU and the PB Heavy Suppressor, so the worst of both worlds. Great. You get the small stealth from the 6KU and the higher 10% damage reduction from the PB Heavy. Well, that fucking sucks. There is one good thing though. You also get the unchanged velocity from the 6KU, but yet that doesn't really make up for anything. A 10% damage reduction is bad enough for primary weapons, but on sidearms it is much worse. This suppressor completely neuters any sidearm it is used on. There is quite literally only one single exception to this rule, the MP28. That is the only pistol I can comfortably say is worth using with a suppressor on it. Every single other one is not. I have no idea what the purpose of this balancing decision was, but if you ask me, the results are just sad. How would it hurt the game if we could actually use suppressed pistols without handicapping ourselves? Anyway, before I forget it, I also need to talk about those barrels from last video. Remember those? Good thing they only get the stealth stats and none of the damage or velocity bullshit. First off, the BSVM. Every barrel on that one functions like a small suppressor. So 30 meter stealth, 15 with subsonic ammo. Then the RM68, short and default barrel, both also function as small suppressors. No subsonic ammo on this one though, so you are stuck with those 30 meters. On the M416 and XM8 LMG we recently also got suppressed short barrels, and because those were grafted from the old PB Heavy suppressor they had, they still behave like a big one. So you get the improved 15 meter stealth, but there is also no subsonic ammo, so no full stealth for you. And last but not least, 2 honorable mentions. The NVK box suppressor on the NVK S22 shotgun is just a PB Heavy suppressor with a fancy new model. Works just the same, damage reduction and all. And finally, the Ghostmaker, or just the crossbow. That thing also works like a big suppressor, but obviously it has no actual suppressor attachment, it's just naturally suppressed. So no fiddling with damage or velocity, just a 15 meter stealth. And unfortunately there are no subsonic arrows for full stealth either. What a shame. Shout out to Chris for being my testing guinea pig when I reconfirmed all the stealth numbers, and also again a big thanks to Richard for helping me record the minimap stealth clips at such short notice. That's it for today, I hope you enjoyed it and I'll see you next time. And in the meantime I will see you on the battlefield. Sorrow out.